right, welcome to a Red Road TV exclusive interview with Native American attorney Brett Chapman. Nawa, brother, and welcome to the show.
Hey, Nawa, to you too. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, man, it's an honor for us to have you on. As I've shared with you before, in our household, you're somewhat of a living legend because of because of your Twitter interactions, and we like to go on. And my daughter, when she was home from college, we would almost every day at the table say, hey, did you see what Brett tweeted today or what Brett said today? So for us, we're very familiar with you in our household. But for those who are not as familiar with you, could you share just some of your background and a little about your ancestors, Chief White Eagle and Standing Bear?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm an attorney here in Oklahoma. Practice civil rights, Native American. Try to focus on Native American civil rights. Also do some criminal defense, which I think kind of flows into that. But in any event, yeah, my ancestors. I'm an enrolled member of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma, but I also am Ponca and Kiowa too. And my Ponca ancestors, as you mentioned, Chief White Eagle. I kind of descend from the line of hereditary chiefs. There was only one hereditary chief, really. That was like kind of the main chief of the tribe. I guess it'd be kind of tantamount to, today like the president type authority.
Right.
And that was my basically my grandma's great great grandfather, or her great grandfather actually. But that was her line, and she was the first non-male to be born in that. So it kind of stopped
Wow.
there. But yeah, they were the hereditary chiefs during the Ponca Trail of Tears, which happened in 1877. And this is about 40 years after Andrew Jackson and the southeastern tribes got removed. So, they teach so little about Indian history that most people don't really know that removals kept happening
Right.
after the more well-known ones, the five tribes there. But anyways, the Poncas get removed in 1877, and the whole deal is illegal. They have a treaty that's in place, and it guarantees them property or the ownership of their home for all time. And basically, the U.S. government sold the Poncas land that they'd guaranteed them in a treaty, sold them to a different tribe.
Wow.
And their way to remedy that was to just forcibly remove the Poncas. And so it's my great 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 grandfather, Chief White Eagle, basically resisted the U.S. government's efforts to do that until the last minute. And they're small. The Poncas at that time were only 800 or so people, and that's facing the United States. So I mean, it's
Right.
completely mismatched. And so ultimately, they go down there. They're forced to go. They're forced to walk down there, and over 200 of them die. And his
Wow.
vice chief, the second chief's name was Standing Bear. And after Standing Bear, all his kids among those 200 was all of his kids. And so after the last one dies, he's kind of this broken man, and just walks back from Oklahoma, which is where they walked us to our ancestral homeland in Nebraska. And, he wants to bury his son there. And so he walks back, and the president sends an order to the military, arrest these people, arrest these Poncas going back and take them back to the reservation. Well, they arrest them. And once they do, though, Standing Bear files what's called a writ of habeas corpus in federal court, first Indian to do that, and actually wins against all odds, and is the first Native American ever granted civil rights. So, yeah, that's a little about my Ponca ancestry, which is a cool story. And so, having that background, I do a lot of Native American advocacy with it, because I think, most people, their knowledge of Native Americans is really lacking. But I think most people, even the person who knows nothing about it, hears like, okay, well, the first to do something, that sounds important, first Native American.
Right.
And so, and being an attorney on top of that, it kind of gives me a platform to, try to do a little bit of good for Indians. So,
Absolutely. I've talked with you before about this. I really truly believe that one of the greatest things that this nation could do, the United States that is to change Columbus Day to Standing Bear Day. Because you have this federal holiday that recognizes a guy who, was a murdering, horrific person, never stepped foot on the land that's now considered the United States, And we recognize this guy with a federal holiday because because of the doctrine of discovery tells him whatever he finds, if they're not, Christian men and own, that they could take that land because of that, he's got this federal holiday in this country. And doesn't it seem just um, more healing and more truthful? And listen, I like the Indigenous Day. I think that's good. But if you're going to recognize somebody, I think Standing Bear would be an amazing person to do that for. The fact that he fought the system in a time where impossible to win against the system. He wins against the system to get civil rights. I mean, you kind of agree with that take? Wouldn't that be a great honor for that legacy
Yeah,
and to really go forward?
I do. I mean, I agree with you 100% because this is a most the response to that, what they always say is, well, this is why do we have to go around changing everything? This is that's history. It's we have to remember it, and that's why they have these things. Well, I think that's just that's nonsense.
Right.
A country is measured by who it honors. And, that's any country. And so in this country, things have changed, whereas back in the 1800s, Columbus, yeah, it's easy to see how they revered him. They were all racist back then. They was like, okay, well, it's all about us back then.
Right. Right.
Well, this doctrine of discovery, like you're saying, but we live in 2020 now and the world's changed. And I think, even everyone knows today. I mean, multiculturalism. I mean, there's still racist people out there, as there always have been. But I think on the whole, people are more accepting today, even if they're racist. It's just that
Right.
this integration, multiculturalism, is part of our nation now. And so when you look at like a day like Columbus Day, if you're going to have, I agree with you, Standing Bear take, because what ends up happening is nobody goes to work. That's why it's good to have a federal holiday like Martin Luther King Day. No one goes to work, and so there's
Right.
maximum focus on why. Why are we all getting off work today, or why are we all getting off school today? Okay, well, it's Standing Bear Day. Well, who was he? And then they're going to run, documentaries, things of that about him, and it lets them know that this guy was a American. I mean, he was a Ponca, but he's a part of our national heritage, I think, as a Native
Right.
American, and it's a good story too, in that it's not negative. Unfortunately, Native Americans, a lot of times we're just reduced to poverty. It's like, well, all
Right.
the Indians, they got screwed over. Poor thing. Like basically we're just never. It's always just this horrendous catastrophe with us. And when people talk about us, it's never a victory story. We never win.
Right.
Um, and when you look at the Standing Bear deal, it's like, well, that's good, that's nice. He fought it and won. No one wants to always be portrayed as losers all the time, and that's just not how it was, anyways. In the grand scheme, yeah, Indians. It was a harsh history, but there were wins in there too. Not everything was a loss. And I think
That's
this
right.
is just a perfect example of it. He was it's just, to me, it's like a college football game. It's like Alabama playing the Citadel and the Citadel winning.
Right.
It's what it is. I mean, it's like this guy, this
Right.
one man, just takes on everything, and he wins. I mean, that's the most American type story I think there is. That's the most quintessentially American story I think there is. And and it's a good thing for me too. And I think it's a good thing, I guess, because it's a positive outcome, and it portrays us in a positive manner. It portrays us as a victory story, and it reminds people that we're still here, as opposed to, and like I say, I have no problem with Indigenous Peoples Day and all that deal. But, if it's going to be American centric and we are stuck in this country and we're part of this country, I think it needs to be, we're reminding people that we're still here. We have these rights and we're part of the fabric too.
Absolutely. And you bring up such a great point. Um, absolutely. Absolutely. Bring up such a great point. Listen, and again, I think Indigenous Day is a wonderful thing. I think, Native American History Month, those are good things, but it's such a vague term and it's not looked at with the, like you said, the specific direction that it needs to be looked at. Like, listen, we know a little bit, they know just a little bit about some of the things that went on those times, but here are some of these stories. And I don't want just, listen, I don't want it just for, you know, white America or non-native America. I want it for our children, our grandchildren to see these strong influences and the impact that they had and the odds and what they're comprised of. DNA, I've said this so many times, it has so much of an impact of who we are, what not just how we look, but our whole mentality, our way of being. A lot is based around our DNA. I want my children, my grandchildren to see the success stories of those who fought the system and won.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And that's like one of my advocacy. at least on my social media platform, is that, I do try to focus on the positives because it's
Absolutely.
like, I guess it's, some people call it like poverty porn. It's true. It is. That's,
Right. Right.
if you watch really closely, and I think I have a pretty good read on, kind of how people talk about Native Americans. And we're always in this list of things that happened in the past. It's always like of American sins. It's always like, well, the genocide of Native Americans, slavery, and also Japanese internment. Well, that locks us in the past here, and it's this terrible thing.
So
Like, we're
true.
not here anymore, and it's like slavery that happened, and then they got rid of it. Japanese internment that happened, and they got rid of it. And then when you make it sound like we're on that list with them, it's just like, okay, well, that happened, and we're all dead.
Yeah.
Uh,
So true.
you
So
know,
true.
and what you want to hear is, again, yeah, those success stories. I mean, it's important to know, like, Indian removal, Trail of Tears, that stuff. But even in that, you can find survival stories, success stories, where people are, they don't even have to be like epic, like Standing Bear taking on a system like that. It can just be surviving, or coming out
Absolutely.
of that, having a success in life, making it, having kids. I mean, that's to me, that's the type of story that needs to be told too, because it's those unknown successes that I think should that should give Native Americans the most pride too. I mean, it's like, I think every Native American knows that our history and traditions and cultures are completely overlooked by everybody else. But that's not to say that it's not important.
Absolutely. Now, I talked a little bit about the impact that DNA has on our life. I want to ask you particularly, uh, being related to Chief White Eagle and Standing Bear and sharing that lineage and that history. Did that play a part in your decision to become a lawyer?
Yeah, absolutely. In that story, what happened in this story was, so when this American federal agent comes to remove them, the White Eagle, he had the copy of the treaty in his hands. They knew it was BS. They knew it was wrong, but there wasn't anything they could do. And so he had this idea to basically start writing letters to the editor, to the media, and trying to leverage the U.S. media to influence public opinion in this country. And basically they were begging for attorneys, like, hey, give us an attorney. And so when Standing Bear got arrested, White Eagle sold, back then, horse trading on the plains, that was a legitimate occupation, horse traders, that
Absolutely.
was currency. And so he sold every horse he had to hire a lawyer for Standing Bear, and all they had was themselves. And so, yeah, that definitely played a role for me, because, I recognize all they had was themselves. And then, in today's world, Native Americans, I mean, that's still a stark reality a lot of the times, that, all Native Americans have of themselves, because no one really knows we even still exist.
Absolutely. Now, not only are you a lawyer, but you're currently working on a book as well. Could you just tell our listeners just a little bit more about this amazing project? I've been able to see some of the work through Twitter and social media. Can you just share with our listeners what it is that you've been working on?
Yeah, so I mean, this book that I'm writing is a true story of basically the Ponca removal, the Ponca Trail of Tears, in this landmark civil rights case. Um, it's been written about before, but the people that have written about it are all, for lack of a better term, they're all white people. And they're
Right.
writing this story as this case was important in American history because it was the first time, public opinion had really turned against the Indian removal program and the treatment of Native Americans. But the way the story's always been written is how they had to write it back then. It's like a white savior story.
Right.
Um, and in this story for the Poncas, it's these journalists, these East Coast journalists, these elite, like poets of the day. Those are the white saviors who they saved the Indians.
Right.
But
Right.
that's not how the story happens, because in real life, the Poncas had agency over their own history. They didn't. None of this was predetermined. Every day, in their position, it just be like, if it happened today, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and so it just erases them interacting with their own world. And so what I'm trying to do here in this book is tell this story as it actually was, including their perspective and the way that I believe the story happened. Unlike the Trail of Tears for the five tribes in the Southeast, which I think most people that know about it know that Andrew Jackson, his law, is to blame for that. Um,
Right.
and then wanting to get land down there. But in this case, like I said, it was illegal because they broke a treaty. And I think the guy that's to blame for it, it's a true crime story, is this federal removal agent. His name is Edward Kimball. And I think this guy is responsible for 230 murders,
Wow.
because he took it on himself and lied about he was like, well, the Chiefs agree to move down there, which was a complete lie. And all these people died. And, I think today this Edward Kimball he was actually, before this happened, which none of this has ever been written about him before. He was the first journalist to learn of the gold discovery in Coloma that set off the California gold rush. That,
Right.
just completely, that's part of one thing that changed Native American history for the worse too. But, he's still, this guy is considered what's known then as a California pioneer. And he's got schools and parks and stuff in Sacramento named after him. He started San Francisco's first newspaper. And so it's kind of like this Confederate
Wow.
statue deal. I mean, it's like, why should this guy be honored? His
Right.
actions kill all
Right.
these people. And the guy that really should be honored is Standing Bear. And so it's writing it from their perspective, putting this, to me, this killer in historical perspective, and then also telling my ancestor story as it was, and it's humanizing them too, as characters, how they felt, their emotions, and that's always written when you read a story about Europeans. I mean, that kind of stuff's always important, but for Native American stories, I mean, it's just like they gloss over it, like again, like on the Trail of Tears in the Five Tribes, they always just kind of, that part's always glossed over, it seems like, because that's the hard part that no one wants to hear.
Right.
But that's the part I want to tell, is, when all your family's dying, because I think that humanizes Native Americans, and that even today, you don't have to be Native American to put yourself in a position where your mom, your grandma, all these people are dying around you. And then you can kind of see that, step in their shoes a little bit.
Absolutely. And I'm going to tell you, Brett, I'm looking so forward to this book because, to be honest with you, and I hate to admit this, prior to, beginning to interact with you on Twitter, I didn't even know who Standing Bear was. I mean, when you talk about all of these nations, and not being from the same nation, we don't know all the stories. But when I begin to kind of research the story of both Chief White Eagle and Standing Bear, I just became blown away with the story, and I think it's a story that this nation needs to hear, and I think it's a story that us nations and of indigenous nations need to hear as well.
Yeah, and what, one thing, I mean, that again, that's kind of going back to what I said earlier about, just because your history is not well known doesn't mean it's not important. And one example I always give is like, okay, well, Chief White Eagle, yeah, he's not Sitting Bull in the American consciousness, but
Right.
he had a statue made of him back in 1800s. And one of the most famous artists to ever live, Salvador Dali, takes his statue and makes an artwork out of him. And so
Right.
to me, that's indicative of that he chose somebody of some historical standing. So just because they don't teach it in American history doesn't mean that it's not important. And that's, I completely agree with you too on Native American history. It's sad. I live here in Oklahoma, and I knew that story obviously from my folks telling me it growing up. But I didn't learn about that in school until ninth grade Oklahoma history class, and then I didn't learn about it again until law school. Until I
Wow.
opened a case
Wow.
book in constitutional law and found his case in there when we talked about it. So, it's nice to see, though, these days there's at the U.S. Capitol, there's a place called Statuary Hall where each state gets to put two statues honoring two people living in that state or famous people in that state. And so Nebraska had actually voted a couple of years ago to remove one of theirs of a politician from the 1800s and replace him with Standing Bear, which I think is great.
Yeah.
And so they just had that ceremony last November or last October. So, I mean, things like that, it's never too late to start honoring and then, or for people to start learning about him, and it's like Nancy Pelosi went to the dedication ceremony. So, I mean, just because they haven't done it in the past doesn't mean, that it can't be something that's important here in the future. And that kind of goes into your Standing Bear idea about Columbus Day.
Absolutely. Now, I've got to tell you, I don't want to get too far off here, but I've got to tell you, one of my favorite things that you've ever done on Twitter is when you posted the email that you had sent to one of your children's teachers who said they were exploring all the great nations, and you kind of brought
Oh,
up brought up like, okay, so when are you going to visit all the, tour through the indigenous nations as well?
yeah, I mean, and that's just part of being Native American, I guess, is that, no one's ever looking for these things. Like, it's
Right.
like, there's very few people looking for Native Americans. I think there's even fewer educated people looking for them. And so, I like to travel a lot. One example I give on Twitter is, my wife and I went to Italy, not last year, but the year before, and it'd be 2018. But we went to Italy and we stopped at the Met Museum in New York there. And every time I go to a museum like that, I'm always looking for the native, because it's all of those things
Absolutely.
are all Eurocentric. And so, we're walking in there, and I was telling them when we were walking in, I was like, I bet the Native American stuff in here is just in the back corner by the exit sign, by the by the fire exit.
Right,
And
right.
sure enough, I was going through there asking everybody, walking through like the Egyptian pyramid display, and I was like, "Hey, where's a Native American?" No one knew where it was. Walked through a colonial type house, a rebuilt one. Just couldn't find it, and then finally I found it was like one Kiowa ghost dance dress in the very back.
Right.
And so I wrote them a letter, and I was like, because to get into that museum, you have to donate, you have to give money. It's called a donation. I was like, well, I gave you guys $100 looking for Native American stuff. All I found was this one thing. I had to walk through this colonial recreation, and as I was walking through there, I was wondering, well, gosh, where was this house at? Whose land or whose Native Americans? Which tribe was, wronged for these people to have all this nice junk?
Right.
Um, and it's just, and it gets an answer from them though. And that's what I always tell other Indians is that, all you got to do as a Native American, once they hear it, and if it's someone that, is in any position, like at a museum or something, they'll always respond to you because it catches them off guard
Right.
because they're always, like on Indian stuff, they're always in the wrong on it because they don't know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I want to ask you something. You bring a unique perspective. As indigenous people and indigenous nations, I personally believe our greatest battle right now is to protect the sovereignty of our nation. It seems like we have all these little things that are going on, but many times it's because the sovereignty is being challenged of that nation that is supposed to be related with and dealt with as a nation. But you, as a Native American lawyer, I tell people all the time that we're not going to win any wars with bows and arrows anymore. If we're going to win them, it's going to be like Standing Bear and win them in the courtrooms. Now, hopefully not for the same reasons, but you get the
Hmm.
point. It's going to be in the legal realm that we've got to begin to train our warriors up into and train up young lawyers up in. And so you bring kind of a deeper understanding of the law and perhaps some of the issues we're facing. What do you think the most pressing issue we're facing as indigenous people and indigenous nations right now?
Yeah. So, I mean, the way I look at it, you're right about the sovereignty. And the way I look at it is, no one would say if you compare like the United States to, let's say Japan or China, everyone knows those are two different countries. They may have, no one would say they're facing the same issues because everyone knows they're two
Right.
different countries. They may have some similar overlapping issues, but for the most part, they're not. They each have different challenges, and that's how I see Native American nations. So you could have a Native nation in Oregon that lives on the Pacific coast there that they've got unique issues, maybe like fishing rights or some water use in the ocean, something like that. That a tribe in Nebraska, in the middle of nowhere, they're not facing. But so they're all each facing different challenges, and we've got what is it up to like 570 federal recognized tribes now,
Right.
something along that. But I think the common thread between every Native American that I would say by far is the most pressing issue is one of visibility and invisibility.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
because most people, I saw a poll in 2018, 2019 that was taken, and it's somewhere along the lines of 40% of the people think we're extinct in America,
Right.
which is
Right.
just crazy. And so, half the battle here, more than half the battle, is just even reminding people we still exist because we're just not part of any public discussion. We're not part of any public consciousness, anything like that. And, on a daily basis, no one thinks of Native Americans, but I mean, I just see it every day. There's all this stuff going on in the world, and we're just never mentioned in it.
Absolutely.
And so part of the battle for each nation here is even telling people what sovereignty is about. And that's part of why, like this, as you mentioned, sovereignty plays a role in even these little issues, and that's like this Elizabeth Warren thing.
Right.
Most people think that's just like, okay, well, she's has this claim, and yeah, well, it's reasonable for her to believe it, but it's not about that. To the Cherokees, they're seeing it as a sovereignty deal because
Absolutely.
they see it as each nation, like the United States. The United States as a sovereign nation has the right to set limits. How is someone a U.S. citizen? That's part of U.S. law. It's the same as being Cherokee.
Right.
That's part of Cherokee law. And so that's what the point they're trying to get across, because what she's done, Elizabeth Warren has done here, is racialized this Cherokee identity. And
Absolutely.
Cherokee isn't a race. Cherokee is a nation. And that's
Absolutely.
what they're trying to get home. And I think that affects every Native American nation in the country. It's a complex history, but it ain't so complex where we just have to be racialized for everything. Because if you
Absolutely.
look at it that way, if they try to racialize Native Americans, then we don't have IHS anymore. There's a
Right.
difference. That's why there's a government to government relationship, is not because we're a race. And so I think that's something I feel really strongly about. That's Native American sovereignty it's the most important thing to me, because that's just the defining characteristic of Native Americans.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, you mentioned Elizabeth Warren, and it kind of brings me in. I appreciate so much you taking some time and being with us, but I want to ask you about one more thing before you go. We're obviously in a crucial time with the 2020 elections approaching, and I'm not asking you to endorse a candidate, but what do you think some of the crucial issues we as Native Americans should be concerned about as we're kind of looking through and selecting and picking a candidate to vote for?
Well, again, I think it goes back to that visibility as well. Someone who's going to be inclusive, they have to respect tribal sovereignty for one. But again, I think this presidency aspect is just such a huge platform that, it's sad, but even a president could do so much good just by mentioning Native American nations and having a
Right.
little bit of knowledge to mention us like that, to educate the country. Because, I mean, just so many people, as you see with Trump during his administration, just everybody hangs on every word that man says. He can put whatever out on Twitter, everyone hangs on it. They're waiting for
Right.
it, And so if you had a president that's out there educating people about Native American sovereignty, or maybe even, agreeing to, repatriate some land, give some land back. I mean, yeah, there's someone that could do some good. Do I think there's anyone out there in this cycle that's like that? Probably not. But, I think Native Americans just need to be looking for who is going to be the best overall for us. Um, and I think not endorsing anybody, but, I've long said, living here in Oklahoma, White Eagle, the reservation where the Poncas are at, it's in the middle of nowhere. And so, other than Poncas and Indians living around there, who else lives by us?
Right.
Poor white people. And so, I've often said that the people that Native Americans have the most in common with in this entire country are poor white people, because they're our neighbors. They live by us. It's not like we're,
Right.
maybe in New York City, that's like immigration's a big deal there, and like cosmopolitan type existence is a big deal there, but not in Oklahoma, not where we live. I mean, it's we're living here in these reddest of states where it's like 80% white,
Right.
maybe 5% us, but and I think Bernie Sanders, not endorsing anybody again, but I think that he does have it right, that the economic opportunity is one thing that unites Native Americans and poor whites out here. I mean, when you're living, in Ponca City, Oklahoma, there's no economic opportunity for anybody. Um,
Right.
and so, again, if you have a candidate that understands that, and a candidate that has some type of plan to incorporate that, rural type people, into their plan for America, then yeah, that's who I would be looking at. And I think for Native Americans, let's say Bernie does get elected, I don't think that, I think that he could do some good for us for sure.
Absolutely. Now, looking, it's kind of talking that rim, it seems like even though it's a mini step, that maybe we kind of took a mini step forward this election cycle. I think about a lot of the candidates showed up for the Frank Lemire Native American Presidential Forum, and even though it's almost now just for kind of an enhanced photo op opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
at least we're getting to the photo op stage, and hopefully, soon we'll be able to get to that stage where people actually are concerned and care about the needs of
Right.
the people that are struggling, that are on these reservations and have to make a decision. Am I going to leave my people, my culture chase greener pastures, or can I be
Mm-hmm.
given the availability to succeed where I'm at?
Yeah, I agree. And, one thing I've thought, I mean, this is just kind of thinking here that, Native Americans, at least the Democratic Party, tends to think that they take Native Americans for granted. I mean, I think that's for
Absolutely.
sure. And I think there's just enough of a Native American population in some of these swing states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan. There's Native Americans up there. And then you look over, North Carolina, there's the Lumbees, there's Native Americans in North Carolina. There's Native Americans out in Arizona, which may be a swing state. I think there's just enough of a Native American population, that if, if we all got together somehow and just, threatened to boycott the Democratic Party, until they just put in their platform, some real attention, not just like, well, yeah, when we get elected, yeah, we'll just be good for you because we're not Trump. That's
Right.
basically what most of them say. Like they need to do something that's real, tangible for us, and then it's really disappointing that they haven't done it yet. As you mentioned, it's kind of like this start, but like, man, I think we need to be part of the platform, and it's like, and I think this really manifests itself in this Elizabeth Warren thing because what her fans and supporters end up saying is like, well, yeah, this Native American thing, that's what I always call it too, Native American thing. This Native
Right.
American thing, it's not that big of a deal. She apologized. Let's just move on. Well,
Right.
yeah, it may
Right.
not be important to you, but, to the Indians, it's really important. And so,
Absolutely.
why can't we be a part of this? And that could be the Republicans too. That includes them too. But why can't we be a part of this partisan process and get our needs out there? Because even looking at the Republican Party, Tom Cole, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a better politician in the country for Native Americans than Tom Cole. Here in Oklahoma,
Hmm.
I think he's I believe he's Chickasaw, but
Right. Right.
you know, and we're just looking. Some of these tribes obviously know how to play the game. They're not just big partisans like many of us, but they're playing the game, and so we just need to get more attention, and we need these political parties here to actually, earn our vote, which is definitely not happening now.
Absolutely. I was listening to the Democratic debate response from Mark Charles. He brought up a really good point. He was there at the Native American Frank Lemire Presidential Forum, and he talked about how each of these people were saying the same thing, that we're going to use it, we're going to talk about these issues, we're going to bring them forth, and then they've got on the big stage, and Native Americans haven't been mentioned at all. It's like
Yeah.
when we were there at the forum, when we were trying to kind of get your votes a little bit, we'll talk about it, but we don't really want to bring these issues to the surface because it might alienate some of our other voters. But here's the thing about it, as we've seen throughout history, despite what people might believe, we're not going anywhere, and we're going to remain, and we're going to continue to be a force. We've just got to find a way to come together.
Yep, that's exactly right, man. You hit it spot on. I agree 100%.
All right, Brett, I appreciate you taking some time. Now, can you let our listeners know where they can find you, especially on Twitter, but any other aspect you want to be able to find you and locate you on?
Yeah, absolutely. It's Brett A. Chapman, BrettaChapman, at Brett A. Chapman. And then my website's also brettachapman.com. Basically, that Brett A. Chapman will get you anything for me.
Absolutely. Brett, we take appreciate you taking time being with us. And again, appreciate so much what you do, not just in the courtroom, but what you do through social media and the educational aspect, because I don't know if you realize it, but it does have a big impact because like I said, families like mine, we're constantly talking about the things that you share on there. So thank you so much for everything you do for our people.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that.